I'm Janet Singer, the co-founder and political director of Crimson Goes Blue. What a time we are living in. There is so much going on that grabs our attention, but I want to get us focused on the 2024 election tonight. Let me start by saying that I'm optimistic about this election. There are many signs that things are increasingly going our way, but I also know that the stakes of this election are high, that many democracies die, and ours could be one of them. The threat of Donald Trump and the increasingly authoritarian MAGA movement is serious, but so is the resistance that initially rose up in 2016. That sea of women in pussy hats has turned into the largest political movement our country has ever seen. Campaigns are about making our case to the voters, and I think we have a very good case to make. Joe Biden promised to bring order, normalcy, and decency back to the White House and to get us through the COVID crisis and restore our economy. Working in a hospital in the early days of the pandemic, I remember that we couldn't get masks because of the incompetence of Trump's administration or an appointment for a vaccine. Thankfully, that part is past. We need to help voters see that the return of some normalcy in our country can be credited to the leadership of our president. We need to tell our stories and present a vision of the promising future that Democrats will bring about, one where we have free speech, the freedom to vote, the freedom to make personal healthcare decisions, and be governed by laws, not a militia. We need to contrast that with the dystopian future Trump and his MAGA compatriots want to bring about. In this week's Time magazine interview, Trump laid out what a second term would look like, and it is horrifying. Red states monitoring women's pregnancies and prosecuting those who violate abortion bans, pardoning those who attacked the Capitol on January 6th, deploying the National Guard to American cities as he sees fit, and staffing his administration only with sycophants who back his lie that the 2020 election was stolen. This election is going to be close and competitive, and I think we're going to win it. First, let me tell you why we can win, and then I'll share the ways that this community can make a difference. Here are some of the things that make me optimistic. We keep winning elections. Democrats overperformed in nearly all the special elections of 2023, and we already have a race in the win column taking back the House with our victory in New York 3. Money. Biden and House and Senate Democrats have more cash on hand than Republicans. In the first quarter of 2024, ActBlue Democratic donors gave 29% more to House races and 20% more to Senate races than in the first quarter of 2020. That early money is a sign of Democratic determination and enthusiasm, and it gives Democrats a head start at defining the opposition, hiring staff, and building the infrastructure that will create the robust field efforts essential for victory. The Biden campaign has opened well over 100 offices in the swing states, while the Republicans have essentially no staff on the ground to conduct activities like registering and persuading voters. The parties. Democrats have strong leadership in the battleground states, while Republicans have gutted the RNC, fired knowledgeable campaign leaders, and are spending a lot of their money on Trump's legal fees. The opposition to Trump inside the GOP is unprecedented, with prominent party leaders not backing their nominee. The quiet competence of the Democratic campaign machine is impressive. While Trump sits in a courtroom looking like a wounded puppy, Biden is barnstorming the battlegrounds and has a team working to expose RFK for the charlatan that he is. In swing states, where moderates are going to determine the winner, Republicans continue to nominate extreme MAGA candidates, making it easier for our candidates to be successful. The party that appears most extreme usually loses. That is why abortion has been such a winning issue for Democrats. Laws from 1864 don't sell well to the American public, and the stories women are sharing about needing to leave their states to get life-saving care are moving people. Millions of women are losing their reproductive rights, reminding voters across the US about the serious threat MAGA has become to our freedoms and democracy. Polling has started moving against them, and Trump can't run from it. Trump has attracted a lot of followers by playing the strong man. I will be a dictator on day one, and I alone can fix it. Actually has appeal in chaotic times. But his barely coherent rants and the image of him sitting in a courtroom controlled by a judge, muzzled and sleepy, do not give people confidence. He is a much weaker candidate than he was in 2020. Crime is down. In the battleground states, unions are mounting an ambitious campaign for the Democratic ticket. And Don Snorleone has replaced Sleepy Joe as the nickname of the month. Now, I don't want to ignore the elephant in the room, namely the situation in the Middle East and the protests on campuses. But I think it's too early to tell how they will affect the election. We do know that this war specifically, and foreign policy historically, rank very low on the list of what matters to American voters, even the younger cohort. Time will tell. So let me lay out our strategy for winning. We particularly need to make our case to swing state voters, those in the battleground states who are drawn to old Republican values, but are disturbed by the direction of the current Republican Party. To those in our coalition who are disenchanted right now, people of color, mostly the men, and young folks, we need to make our case that Biden and Democrats can make their lives better. And we especially need to focus on a relatively newly named group, the surge voters. These are the voters who started voting after 2016, those who came out for the first time in 2018 or 2020, motivated by anti-Trump sentiment, and were responsible for the surge in turnout we've seen ever since. I'm going to share a few slides now. Where are we going to focus our efforts? You will find this new map on our website. Link should be heading into the chat. And if you click on any state, you'll see all the competitive races there. This will again be an election played out in a few critical states. The presidential battleground is familiar: Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. Biden won all of these states last time. Control of the Senate will be fought in most of those same states, plus Ohio and Montana. Holding all of the 7 competitive Senate states will be very challenging, but also possible for Democrats. I feel much more confident that we can flip the House back to Democratic control. Our task is to win back 4 more seats. 10 of the most competitive seats are concentrated in California and New York, where we have many CGB members living. Those are the new states we're going to be focused on. We have teams in the battleground states, as well as a team leading our voter protection efforts, phone banking, postcarding, and fundraising. You can find out when the teams meet in our calendar and also in our newsletter. And stay tuned for new web pages about our teams and how you can get more involved. We are exactly 6 months out. The 3 most effective things we can be doing now are talking directly to voters, giving early money, and working to make sure that voters can vote and have their votes counted. Let me speak briefly about these 3 things. We need to talk directly to voters. Crimson Goes Blue has a phone bank where we are doing just that into the critical state of Arizona. You can join us every Saturday for that, and if you've never done it, we will help you. We will soon be rolling out our Connect to Elect canvassing trips. We have plans to canvass in the battleground states in the first week of early voting. I hope a lot of you living in blue states will commit to taking an election vacation with other CGB members. Mike, can you put up the next slide? Yeah. So these are the early voting dates. So plan your vacation now, depending on where you want to go. There is nothing like talking to voters at their doors to understand what matters to Americans. It is always an enlightening and fun experience, especially when you do it with friends in this community. And it is the single most effective tactic for getting out the vote. So give thought to blocking off some time for our democracy. Our team leaders are making plans for you, and we will soon be sending out an interest form for you to learn more and sign up for one of our Connect to Elect trips. I hope all of you know about our Crimson Goes Blue portfolio. Please consider us as your financial advisor for political donations. When you donate through our portfolio, with one click, your dollars will go where they'll have the most impact. We are constantly researching and updating the recipients to match the priorities at each phase of the election cycle. We currently have a match going on, so your dollars will be doubled into May up to $115,000. And we have a goal of raising $2 million for this cycle. Thanks to everyone who has given so far. The other big effort you can join right now concerns voter protection. Republicans have worked hard to take our voters off the rolls and to make it difficult for our voters to vote. We are working with our partners at the VoPro Pros, an all-volunteer voter protection organization, and state Democratic parties on recruiting poll observers, curing ballots, researching election deniers, and educating and re-registering voters whose ballots were undeliverable. Our voter protection team, led by Hillary Klein and Karen Dash, is our largest. You don't need to be a lawyer to join that team, and you can participate in the projects on your own time. The link to sign up for our next meeting, which is this Wednesday, is in the chat. I hope a lot of you will join us. Those of us in this room have the incredible gift of a Harvard education, and I believe a special obligation to use our talents, passion, and resources on behalf of our democracy. As the famous Gates says, enter to grow in wisdom, depart to serve better thy country and thy kind. Now that was a daunting call to action when I walked in and out of that gate in the 80s. It's a little less daunting now that I have life experience and this incredible community to do the work with. The leadership of Crimson Goes Blue, including our many volunteer leaders, is dedicated to giving you opportunities to participate in the upcoming elections, to make a difference, whether you have a little time or a lot, whether you have a little money or a lot, and whether you have a little influence or a lot. To quote what our president said to the journalists at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, I'm asking you to rise up to the seriousness of the moment. Move past the horse race numbers and the sideshows that have come to dominate and sensationalize our politics, and focus on what's actually at stake. Every single one of us has a serious role to play in making sure our democracy endures. I have my role, but with all due respect, so do you. And now I'm going to turn it over to Leisha Hurst, one of the founders of Crimson Goes Blue and the co-leader of our phone banking team, to introduce our special guest, Preet Bharara.
Hello, everyone. I am Leisha Hurst, class of '84. I am one of the co-founders of Crimson Goes Blue, and it is my great pleasure and honor to introduce our special guest, Preet Bharara, class of '90. Preet has such an extensive string of impressive accomplishments that I don't know where to start. So I'll start with his Twitter bio, where he describes himself this way: patriotic American and proud immigrant, Springsteen fan, banned by Putin, fired by Trump, which for some of you may be all you need to know. A few other highlights of his career: for 8 years, from 2009 to 2017, Preet served as U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. He was dubbed one of the most consequential prosecutors in American history by The New Yorker, and led some of the most significant criminal and civil litigations brought in the SDNY, overseeing 200 assistant U.S. attorneys on cases that ranged from civil rights violations to international terrorism, gang violence, narcotics and arms trafficking, and public corruption. Before serving as U.S. Attorney, Preet was chief counsel to Senator Chuck Schumer, our current U.S. Senate Majority Leader, and he is a partner at the law firm Wilmer Hale and a distinguished scholar in residence at the NYU School of Law. Boy, his students are lucky. He also wrote a New York Times bestseller entitled Doing Justice: Prosecutors' Thoughts on Crime, Punishment, and the Rule of Law, which I highly recommend for those of you who haven't read it. The audio version especially, read by Preet himself. He also shares his perspective as host of two podcasts, Stay Tuned with Preet and Cafe Insider, on the Vox Media Podcast Network, which I also highly recommend. At Harvard, Preet was a member of the Harvard Democrats, an anchor for WHRB News, a writer for the Harvard Political Review, a GovJock, and a semi-permanent fixture at the Hong Kong. Preet will share some remarks, and we'll be sure to leave 10 to 15 minutes for questions at the end. So please put your questions in the chat. Preet Bharara, welcome to Crimson Goes Blue.
Thanks. Can you all hear me and see me? Okay, great. So thanks for having me. It's a treat to be with you all on this Sunday afternoon. I am a proud alum of the Harvard class of 1990, where I was a GovJock. I don't think they use the term GovJock anymore. I have two sons who are currently at the university, one of whom is likely to major in physics, and the other of whom is likely majoring in social studies. So no GovJocks among my progeny, fortunately or unfortunately. I also want to apologize. I did not come with a song or with a music video. That's not my forte. So I apologize. Had I known, I would have maybe delegated that to somebody and put that together. So I think what you all are doing and congregating to do on a regular basis is incredibly important. It may be among the most important civic duty that citizens can pursue at this time. I thought I'd spend just a couple of minutes giving you my thoughts about Trump's trials and tribulations, which I think is among the words in the title for the program. Then tell you why that's not really going to do the trick insofar as our democracy is concerned, ultimately, because that's ultimately about politics, not about the upholding of the rule of law, I think, and I'll explain what I mean by that. And then give you an example of a way that I tried to get my kids involved politically, but I more importantly, I think, want to hear what questions are on your mind. I think I can anticipate some of them. So with respect to the trial going on in Manhattan, I think it's going well. I'm in the group of people who thinks that the only trial that will have begun and will have concluded by the election will be this trial by the Manhattan DA's office. I have some insight into the personalities on both sides. Alvin Bragg, the Manhattan DA, used to work for me at the Southern District of New York. And two of the lawyers on Trump's side, Todd Blanche and Emil Bove, who you've been hearing about, also used to work for me. In fact, I hired Emil, who was in the news a lot last week for his cross-examination efforts, hired him at the Southern District of New York. And what I'll say is, whatever you think about the case and whatever you think about Donald Trump and his antics, that the lawyers who are overseeing these cases are good and honorable lawyers, at least so far. And you always proceed with trepidation if you begin to represent Donald Trump for various reasons, including his track record of not paying his lawyers. But I think with respect to this trial, as distinguishable from some other trials, including the civil trial relating to E. Jean Carroll, there's competent counsel on the Trump side, and there's very competent counsel on the DA side. I also am in the category of people who think, whether it matters or not, that the most significant and centrally important to democracy criminal case is one of the three that will not get tried before the election. And we can talk about this if you want, the little detour that's happened by way of the Supreme Court with respect to the January 6th trial in the District of Columbia. And the trial that's taking place in Manhattan is important. It's important to uphold the rule of law. It's not clear to me that it's a slam dunk case. I think it's a triable case. I think one of the reasons that my former colleague, Todd Blanche, agreed initially to serve as counsel to Donald Trump is because it's a triable case. It's a little bit more complicated than I think some people think it is, in part because it'll take some doing to accelerate what is fundamentally a falsification of business records case, which is a misdemeanor, to bootstrap that into being a felony, which is a little bit more complicated than it may have needed to be. The thing that I will say as a transition to the political about the Manhattan trial is I was asked a question at the 92nd Street Y, which is a great forum in Manhattan a few weeks ago, talking about some of these same issues. And the question was, if there's a verdict in the case and the verdict is guilty, which I don't think is a foregone conclusion, what do you think that will do to people's perceptions of Donald Trump and to people's perceptions of the criminal justice system? And I think that's a very important question, and one I think that's on a lot of people's minds. And I'll tell you what my view of that is in a moment. But what's sort of dispiriting to me is the fact that the trial is not being televised, and people can't, in a wholesale way, watch the witnesses, watch the testimony, hear the lawyers' arguments, decide for themselves, as they might as armchair jurors or armchair lawyers themselves, the credibility of the witnesses, the sufficiency of the proof, the control of the judge, whether it's being a fair and an appropriately fought trial, is not going to be known to people who get their news, whether on the progressive side from their outlets or on the conservative side from their outlets. And already we've seen examples of outright lies that are being told about demonstrably provable things that are happening in the courtroom. So, for example, Donald Trump a week ago or 10 days ago told all his followers on Truth Social and elsewhere, in a way that was echoed by a lot of his followers and supporters around the country, that this very, very unfair judge, Judge Merchan, was not allowing him, was prohibiting him from attending the graduation of his son, Barron. That was a lie. The judge had only determined that he was going to put off that decision. And of course, in the last few days, has agreed to let Donald Trump take a day off trial to adjourn for a period of time so he can attend Barron's graduation. Now, that's not the most important thing in the world, but to me, it's a sign that to the extent anybody thinks that even a guilty verdict in this trial is going to change hearts and minds among Donald Trump's base, that's just not going to be the case. Is there some possibility that among the universe of people who are independents and a vanishingly small number of people who I'm curious about their psychology, who are undecided as between Biden and Trump, if the fact that these are no longer allegations but are actually proven charges in a court of law by 12 ordinary Americans from New York, maybe it'll move them some. But overall, I don't think that the trial is going to be a decisive factor in the election. And what I'll say is, I think there needs to be a separation between our expectations of what the law can do and what politics can do, and campaigning can do, and raising money for Biden's re-election campaign can do, and all of the things that have been talked about on this call, and that this organization is doing, which I think are incredibly important, centrally important. The thing that I used to do in my life that was alluded to, being a prosecutor and enforcing the laws that other people are doing, Jack Smith, and in the other jurisdictions, Alvin Bragg among them, they're important. They're important to the rule of law. They're important to enforcing and interpreting the law. They're important for accountability. But they are not things that we should rely upon to incapacitate Donald Trump politically. And by the way, that's been the story for some years now. There has been this hope among some folks that Robert Mueller would have been the one to take Donald Trump out. There was hopes that the first impeachment proceeding might have done that. There was hope that maybe the second impeachment proceeding may have been able to do that. Then there was a discussion, largely academic, and it was shot down 9-0 by the Supreme Court, that the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment relating to insurrection was not only a plausible argument, but a dispositive argument, and that would deal with Trump politically once and for all. And the point I'm making is, and I think it's actually not a dispiriting point, but an important point, is the way to defeat Donald Trump for good, and the way to defeat imitators of Donald Trump, and the way to defeat Trumpism as a whole, is not by the operation of some law, and not by the operation and pursuit of criminal justice in any one of the four forms where it's being pursued, is not by making an argument about the 14th Amendment. The best way to do it, and the most definitive and decisive way to do it, is at the ballot box. And that's why I think the work that you all are doing is so important. To do it in a decisive fashion, in a deafening fashion, in a wholly incontrovertible fashion. That's the thing that's going to cause people in Donald Trump's own party to say, we need to abandon him. We need to abandon his ideology. We need to abandon his rhetoric. We need to abandon his tactics because they're disgusting, and more importantly, for their purposes, their pragmatic purposes, they're losing propositions. So obviously, the legal cases are near and dear to my heart. I comment on them on the podcast and on television. I care about them. I know the people who are involved in them. I used to be in that business myself. But as a matter of sustaining democracy, aside from holding Donald Trump accountable for his various crimes, we have to defeat him at the ballot box. And that requires all the things that you've been talking about and that you've been committed to. So I think that's a wonderful thing. The little anecdote that I was going to tell, that was suggested that I tell, was I tried to get my sons involved in democracy. And back in the summer of 2020, you'll recall that we were all idly sitting by at home as the pandemic had gripped the country. And both my boys, I have 3 kids, my daughter a little older. I decided that I would use the benefit of my platform. I now have 1.7 million Twitter followers. Then I had, I guess, a little bit fewer than that. And I said, for the 31 days of August of 2020, I want you each day together to identify either an incumbent, but more appropriately, a challenger Democrat running for a House seat so that the House would be Democratic after 2020, and make a recommendation to me as to which candidate I should donate $500 to. I agreed to donate $500 every day to a candidate of their choosing. And they had to make the argument to me every evening before dinner as to why they liked this candidate, why they thought this was an appropriate candidate to get attention and funding. Some considerations were, did they have good policies? Were they appropriately progressive? But also, pragmatically, did they have a chance of winning? And, did they need the money? And did they need the attention? And every day for 31 days in August, they made a recommendation to me. They drafted the initial tweets. I know we don't like Twitter that much. I tweet much less than I used to, but it is an exercise in how to write more economically if you only have a certain number of characters you can use. And so we raised money for 31 candidates over the course of August, and then we extended it. And for the first 7 days until Labor Day in September of 2020, we did the same thing for the Senate. My sons recommended, and then I endorsed and contributed to 7 Senate candidates. And by the way, with respect to some of these folks, on the strength of 1 or 2 tweets, given the platform, some of these candidates raised tens of thousands of dollars. We actually participated in a couple of fundraisers online that my boys attended and said a couple of words at. So it was we had the privilege of being able to do that. I have a big platform, and we had the funding at home to make those contributions. But it's just a thought of a fun way to engage young people. I think young people are very, very important. And there's been some discussion on this call and obviously in other forums about where young people are on the Democratic spectrum and ideological spectrum. But that was a fun thing I did with my boys. I got a little closer to them. It was for a good cause. Many of the people that we funded did not, in fact, succeed in their elections, but I think it was an overall, good project. We called it Housework 2020. So let me end there and see if there are questions that people want to put to me. Again, congratulations on the work. Thank you for the work. The lawyers can do their thing, but then really the solution to what I think is plaguing our democracy and the thing that we need to do to prevent Donald Trump from regaining the White House is definitive drubbing at the polls.
Thank you so much, Preet. So given that you're shifting away a little bit to the question of, voting and the election and the importance, we do have a couple questions about that, which is, what do you see as the main threats, both legal and illegal, to our ability to have a free and fair election in November?
Well, I guess the topical thing to talk about that I've spent some time talking about on the podcast recently, and we've seen some examples of this, is misinformation. And misinformation has been a problem, whether internally within our borders or externally from other countries, including Russia, has been on the horizon for a bit. But with the advent of AI and deep fakes, it's really, 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 I think, a sincere worry of ours. I don't think we have, the FEC, the Federal Election Commission, is rather toothless. Congress itself, I don't think, has done a great job of keeping up with technology. There are some laws that have been proposed. Amy Klobuchar, I think, has a good one, but they've not been enacted yet about how to deal with, this new potential problem of deep fakes that can misdirect people as to, the policy or the record of an adversary, the time, place, and manner of voting. You can put out into the ether things that the other person has said, but they haven't really said. And there are examples of these, not necessarily at the presidential election level, but there have been examples of these hitting the news in the last number of days. And we did have the example of an AI resourced robocall in New Hampshire, where Joe Biden's voice was imitated. This is obviously a problem in lots and lots of other areas in business and stock market manipulation and in fraud too. But very, very deeply concerned that this issue is going to arise in the election, and given how much experience people have with it, which is not a lot just yet, it provides an opportunity for there to be real mischief. So everyone needs to be, I think, vigilant about it. Trust good sources. See if something is reported in multiple places. If you see somebody, putting out, potential comment from someone, just always, depending on the outlet, trust but verify. As people have with, if you find something bizarre, sometimes bizarre things end up being true. So sometimes it's the case that a candidate has written somewhere in a book that they shot a puppy in the head. That turned out not to be a deep fake. I might have not believed that, but it turned out to be true. So exercise your Harvard judgment as to these matters.
Excellent. Thank you. I think a lot of us are scared about that, the AI issue and the disinformation. So jumping to what should happen if Trump were to win. Here's a question. Can't Trump only potentially pardon himself for his federal crimes? Couldn't he still be prosecuted and imprisoned for his state improprieties?
So he can't So the one thing that is clear, and many things are not clear, the one thing that is clear is he cannot pardon himself either retrospectively or prospectively for a state conviction. He's not going to have any state convictions potentially. There's one possible in New York. We'll see if that happens. I think there's, he's got a shot at hanging up the jury. All he needs is one juror, and we don't know how the jury is receiving the evidence because we don't see their faces on television. And I have not been in the courtroom. He has another argument with respect to unconcluded cases, and I suspect and expect the Georgia case will remain unconcluded if he rejoins the White House in January of next year. And that is to take the assertion made by two opinions of the Office of Legal Counsel that were operative and when Mueller did his investigation, and that the Department of Justice endorses, but it's never been decided by any court. And that is the principle that a sitting president, sitting commander-in-chief, cannot have his or her attention diverted in such a way as to have to defend oneself in a criminal proceeding. So that argument, if you were to assert it with respect to the Georgia case, or if in the New York case there was not a conviction, it's being retried, is one that would have, I think, legitimate traction because people on all sides of the ideological spectrum and on all sides of legal issues have accepted that position. Now you could find a court not agree with that. We'll have to see, but that to me remains the way in which he evades responsibility. Now, if he gets convicted in Manhattan before the election, and then he gets reelected, it doesn't affect his ability to serve. Ironically, if he got convicted in Florida, he might not be able to vote, but he could serve as president of the United States. So there's some built-in ironies in our system which need to be addressed also. So you're right that he can't pardon himself, but he can still derail those prosecutions for various reasons.
So moving on to the question of the presidential immunity case. So some of the justices in the immunity case appear to want to formulate a general rule regarding criminal immunity rather than issuing a narrower ruling that is more tailored to the particular charges against Trump. One problem with this approach, as we are seeing, is that it almost guarantees a lengthy decision-writing process and bouncing it back to the lower court in addition, and it makes the trial before the election impossible. So what do you think of this approach, though, constitutionally, to constitutional decision-making as a general matter?
Yeah, so I agree with the last part of the stem of your question, that there's no way that the January 6th trial pending in front of district court judge in DC is going to be able to commence and conclude. I think based on the oral argument on the absolute immunity issue, that you saw lots of different justices, whether you agree with them or not, all over the map. And they have different views about various things. They have different concerns about what is important, what's not important. There is I think, real debate and a complicated debate on what separates and what the difference is between an official act that may or may not be covered by immunity versus a private act, which may or may not be covered by immunity in a different way. And to the extent that Justice Roberts will want to be the deciding vote, and I think a lot of experts think he will take the opinion unto himself to write the majority opinion, depending on what kind of compromise you can work out. There's so many things to work out. It's not going to be a quick decision. They did not break the land speed record in taking this case. They did a little bit faster than they do for normal cases that go up to the Supreme Court after granting cert. But they're not in a gigantic rush. And so some people I see on television who are friends and colleagues of mine who still hold out a lot of hope that it'll happen. I don't agree with those people. I think the earliest you'll see a decision, given that there'll be a lot of different opinions, I think, that will overlap in some way on the progressive and the conservative side. You're not going to get an opinion until the end of June, maybe beginning of July. It's just not going to be one they're going to rush to finish, because there's going to be a lot of horse trading and back and forth on definitions and on figuring out what the law should be in this case of first impression. By the way, it's a case of first impression because no president has ever put the country through this before. And then once you get to beginning of July or the end of June, there's just not time on the clock. What I was struck by in the oral argument, I think a lot of other people were also, was depending on where you sat on the court, you placed your concern in one bucket or another, right? So the conservative justices, particularly Alito, seem to be much more concerned about the prospect of a prosecutor in the future running amok, right? A prosecutor deciding, well, there's no absolute immunity. I wake up on a Tuesday morning. What am I going to do today? Why don't I indict the President of the United States? Because it's easy to do. All I need is probable cause, proverbial ham sandwich, etc. And so Alito and some of the others of his colleagues on the court had the overriding concern about the run amok prosecutor. What I think is more important, and actually has been presented to us, and is the reason we're in court in the first place, is the counterexample of the run amok president. And so if you were more concerned about a current or future president running amok, you think one thing about what the rules should be and one thing about absolute immunity. And if you're more concerned about those crazy overreaching prosecutors such as they are, then you have a different view. And I found that very, very interesting. It was interesting to me that there was not a lot of discussion. There's more discussion about hypotheticals in the future and what the guardrails might be and what the protections might be against, an overreaching prosecutor, a hypothetical overreaching prosecutor, than about the actual stuff that has been done by the sitting president, who is the defendant in the case.
Yeah, interesting. I think we're not going to see a decision for a while.
Yeah.
So one more question about the courts and the election. Following the 2020 election, the courts did a very professional and nonpartisan job dealing with Trump's claims of election fraud. What types of challenges do you expect this year, and do you anticipate the same degree of professionalism, if that's the right word to use?
No, I think so. I think the court, if anything, may have gotten more even-handed and professional. If you think that there is more reason to trust and respect, as far as elections go, Biden appointees than Trump appointees. That's I tend to believe that hypothesis. So I think the courts have done a reasonable job, and now they have a track record of having done a good and reasonable and thoughtful nonpartisan job overall. And I think they're going to want to build on that. I think you'll see some of the same spurious claims, some of which we're not going to be able to anticipate, some of which we can because they were made before. But look, the most important thing, this is a hope that probably will not be realized. For purposes of maintaining confidence and trust and avoiding alienation generally and violence specifically, the more definitive and decisive Joe Biden's victory, the better. Now, I don't hold out hope, no matter what the vote count is, overall popular vote, electoral college, or the particular voting that happens and the results that come in the various swing states, that no amount of win is going to convince some people. I mean, the Trump strategy and his cohort strategy is that, heads I win, tails you lose. I'll accept the results if I win. If I don't win, then it's, inherently and definitionally fraud. But I do think there are more reasonable people who can be persuaded if there's a drubbing at the polls. I don't hold out a lot of hope that there will be a drubbing. We're a very divided, polarized country, and the polls don't, at this point, 6 months out, don't seem to to give much hope that there can be a definitive, very, very strong, overwhelming popular vote and electoral college vote victory on the part of Joe Biden. But that's what you should be fighting for. That's what you should be fanning out to try to achieve. It's not enough to win. I mean, the country will be better if Joe Biden wins by a lot than if he wins by a little.
What do you think, speaking of what we can do as voters, what should be the priority for what we demand from our representatives in terms of disinformation regulation?
I think thoughtful legislation that gives teeth to the Federal Election Commission. I think, as I mentioned, Amy Klobuchar, I think has a reasonably good bill. I think that both sides have an interest in being more bipartisan than they normally are, because this is true for a lot of things, by the way. Today we're talking about the overreaching and the fraud and the misinformation and the disgusting tactics of Donald Trump. By the way, and maybe people will disagree with me on this, I don't think those are inherently Republican things. They're Trumpian things. And demagoguery is not limited to conservatives. And engaging in illegal activity. When I was U.S. attorney, we prosecuted more because there were more of them. We sent more Democrats to prison than we sent Republicans to prison. And so it's confused me as to why it shouldn't be the case that behind, I'll use a Harvard professor's term, behind the veil of ignorance, you should want it to be the case, not knowing who the future bad person will be, the future agitator, the future norm breaker, the future rogue, demagogue, lying, mendacious candidate. In 12 years, that could be a Democrat. We don't know. Those are not things that are about policy. You can debate issues of reproductive rights, and those align based on ideological and political and partisan positioning. But the things that are most odorous, anti-democratic about Donald Trump are not necessarily limited to him. And you could imagine that people on the Republican side should want to guard against a Democratic version of that overreach in the future. And that goes for, I think, the country generally, when you're talking about the laws and about codifying some of these norms that we have not codified since the beginning of the country. But it goes double and triple for taking care of abuse in the form of misinformation. Everybody who's in Congress right now, right, is a potential, whether you're a Democrat, Republican, or independent, is a potential victim from a challenger of misinformation, whether it's AI related or AI resourced or not. So you would think that this is not a specific solution, but a sort of general approach, that you should have some bipartisan momentum, if for no other reason than self-protection electorally, to figure out ways that challengers who come out of the blue can fight you and win at the ballot fair and square, and not by promoting falsehoods and deep fakes and AI generated voices. Everyone's got an interest in that, and so people need to figure out a way to get over their other problems that they have of a political fighting nature, and agree on some stuff.
Right. Should is the operative word. Let's hope that's true. Well, thank you so much, Preet, for joining us and sharing the wisdom and your expertise with us all and the listeners of your podcasts. So thanks again. Now,
thanks so much. Good luck, everybody.
Thank you.